This document, now referred to as the Shadow Ledger, suggests that while the world watched a city under siege, a secret economy was calculating the worth of its citizens as commodities. You are standing in the center of a room where the air is heavy with the scent of wet limestone and ancient, decaying paper. The rain in Sarajevo doesn't just wash the streets. It seems to soak into the very history of the stones, keeping the past damp, cold, and heavy. You can hear the rhythmic, agonizingly slow dripping of water against a rusted pipe somewhere deep in the foundation of this archive. The silence here is absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket of isolation that makes you feel as though you have stepped out of time and into a space where the truth is finally allowed to breathe. Every footstep you take on the cracked concrete feels like a profound intrusion into a secret that was never meant to be declassified. The human premium was a calculation based on a person's statistical likelihood of being forgotten by the outside world. If you had no family beyond the city limits, if no one was searching for your face in the newsreels, your value on the ledger increased significantly. You were worth more to the shadow brokers if you were, for all intents and purposes, already a ghost while your heart was still beating. It is a deep psychological weight that the survivors still carry, the cold knowledge that their very existence was once a matter of a dark, administrative trade. Walk further into the archive, where the shadows are deepest and the dust sits undisturbed like a layer of grey velvet over the iron shelves. You are searching for a specific file, one that details the exit protocols for those who were bought and sold within the city's perimeter. There were no transactions involving currency in this ledger, only the exchange of identities and the surrendering of legal personhood. To leave the city through the secret tunnels, one sometimes had to surrender their entire history to someone else who remained behind in the dark. The ledger records these exchanges with a cold, journalistic precision that defies the chaotic reality of the time. It is a ledger of living phantoms, people who walked out of the city and ceased to exist on any official map of the world, leaving only a blank space in the census. The air grows colder as you reach the back of the vault, where the light from your lantern barely touches the corners. You realize that the ledger wasn't just a record of the past, but a blueprint for how a human being can be systematically erased through the quiet violence of bureaucracy. The rain outside has become a constant, low-frequency hum, a wall of water that isolates this building from the modern world. You are alone with the files, feeling the isolation pressing in, finding a strange, deep comfort in the weight of the forgotten names. You can almost hear the scratching of a fountain pen across the page, the sound of a name being struck through, the finality of a life becoming a premium. The shadows here do not move. They wait, holding the breath of a city that has seen too much and spoken too little. The walls of the vault are stained with the dampness of decades, forming dark patterns that look like maps of territories that no longer exist on any modern globe. You feel the weight of the human premium here as if it were a physical pressure against your skin, a secret kept in the dark. As you turn the final page of the first volume, the paper feels brittle and thin, like dried skin beneath your fingertips. The ink has faded to a deep, bruised purple, the declassified evidence of a system that viewed humanity through the lens of a cold, mathematical accounting. Beneath the city's surface, the shadow ledger remains a testament to the anomalies of human existence, where the most dangerous thing wasn't the falling steel, but the silent, calculated ink of a clerk sitting in a room just like this one. You lift the second volume from its rusted cradle, the weight of the binding surprisingly heavy, as if the paper itself has absorbed the gravity of the secrets it holds. This volume is bound in a dark, synthetic leather that feels unnervingly like cold skin, a tactile reminder of the physical cost associated with these administrative entries. As the cover creaks open, you find the exit protocols mentioned in the previous records, laid out in a series of intricate, hand-drawn diagrams that map the city's subterranean arteries. These were not just routes for movement. They were the transit points where a person's history was professionally detached and reassigned to a new carrier. The process was known as identity migration, a clinical term for the total dissolution of an individual's legal existence in exchange for a passage through the darkness. You find a list of requirements for those seeking to leave: the surrender of all birth certificates, the forfeiture of family photographs, and the signing of a document that acknowledged their status as a non-entity. The ink in this volume is darker, more concentrated, as if the clerk who wrote these entries felt the mounting pressure of the world outside closing in. The handwriting is frantic yet disciplined, a paradox of controlled panic that mirrors the psychological state of a city suspended in a state of permanent uncertainty. You find a section titled The Echoes, which details the lives of those who remained behind but assumed the roles of those who had departed. It was a mirror-image society where one man might spend his days living out the biographical details of a woman who had vanished weeks prior, maintaining the illusion of her presence to satisfy the administrative quotas. The air in this section of the vault is even thinner, carrying a metallic tang that suggests the presence of old machinery or perhaps the lingering residue of the very pens that signed away so many lives. You feel a sudden, sharp prickle of awareness on the back of your neck, the sensation of being observed by the very names that populate these brittle pages. The ledger notes that the most valuable commodity was untraceability, a state achieved by those whose social connections had been systematically severed by the isolation of the siege. To be truly alone was to be a prime asset for the shadow brokers, as there would be no one to question the sudden, quiet transition from a person to a premium. Deep within the appendix of the volume, you find a collection of fingerprints pressed into the paper with a dark, oily substance that has not completely dried even after 30 years. These are the physical remnants of the lost, the final tactile proof of their existence before they were absorbed into the silence of the shadow ledger's intricate accounting. The rhythmic dripping of water has changed tempo, sounding now like a slow, deliberate heartbeat echoing through the hollow pipes of the archive. It is a reminder that while the people may have been erased, the architecture of their absence remains a living, breathing part of the city's hidden foundation. You come across a notation regarding residual value, a calculation of how much a person's absence could be worth to those who controlled the flow of information. The higher the premium, the more likely the individual was to be transferred into the shadow economy, becoming a ghost who still occupied a physical space. The walls of the vault seem to lean inward, the damp stone shimmering with a layer of moisture that reflects the dim glow of your lantern in fractured, unsettling patterns. You realize that the ledger is not just a record of what happened, but a manual for how to disappear without ever leaving the room you are standing in. In the very back of the volume, tucked between two pages that have fused together from the humidity, you find a small, handwritten note on a scrap of yellowed paper. It contains a single sentence: "The ink is more permanent than the flesh." As you close the second volume, the sound of the heavy cover meeting the pages sends a dull thud through the chamber, a sound of finality that seems to resonate in your very bones. The silence returns, but it is no longer empty. It is filled with the weight of 3,000 identities that were traded in the dark. The rain outside continues its tireless percussion against the city, a grey veil that keeps the secrets of the Muljacka River safely tucked away from the prying eyes of the modern world. You stand in the center of the vault, a witness to a cold, administrative shadow that still lingers in the damp corners of the past. The lantern's flame flickers, casting long, dancing shadows that stretch across the floor like the fingers of those reaching out from the ledger's pages. You are the only living soul in a room full of phantoms, a guardian of a truth that was never meant to be declassified. The third volume does not rest on a shelf. It sits isolated upon a low pedestal of calcified salt, its binding wrapped in sheets of hammered lead. The heavy metal casing is meant to shield the contents, not from the moisture of the vault, but perhaps to keep the energy of the entries from leaking into the physical world. As you touch the cover, a faint, rhythmic vibration thrums against your fingertips, a subterranean frequency that matches the pace of a resting heart. This volume documents the integration phase, a chillingly efficient protocol for the permanent installation of the new identities created in the previous books. It wasn't enough to simply vanish. One had to be woven into the fabric of the city's remaining population like a phantom thread. The text describes cognitive colonization, the practice of feeding a subject a steady diet of another person's habits, preferences, and fears until the original self was starved into submission. The pages here are thinner, almost translucent, as if the paper itself is losing its material density. The entries are no longer handwritten. They are produced by a cold, precise typewriter that strikes the page with such force that the letters are embossed into the fibers. The names listed here are categorized by frequency of echo, a measurement of how often the ghost of the former person was spotted in the periphery of their old life by friends who didn't know they were gone. You find a diagram of a static room, a sensory deprivation chamber located somewhere beneath the very floor you are standing on. It was here that the premiums were held during their transition, kept in a state of suspended animation while their legal assets were harvested. The ledger notes that the silence in these rooms was so absolute that the occupants began to hear the sound of the city's bureaucratic machinery grinding above them, a clockwork of erasure that never slept. A loose leaf falls from the book, depicting a map of the Muljacka River, but it is not the river of the surface. It shows the inverse flow, a network of drainage tunnels where the physical belongings of the erased, suitcases, jewelry, wedding rings, were discarded to be ground into silt by the current. The river was not just a landmark, it was the city's primary digestive organ, breaking down the discarded remnants of 10,000 lives. The air grows colder, and your breath hitches in the back of your throat, turning into a fine mist that hangs suspended in the lantern light. You turn to a section titled The Final Audit, which lists the names of the clerks who maintained the shadow ledger. Beside each name is a date of voluntary vacancy. You realize with a start that the very man who spent years recording the disappearance of his neighbors eventually recorded his own, his handwriting becoming smaller and more precise until it vanished into a single, microscopic dot. Beneath a heavy seal of black wax, you discover the Yarnus Protocol. It details the lives of the highest-tier assets, individuals who were assigned two completely different identities to be lived on alternating days of the week. This was the ultimate safeguard against detection, a psychological fracture so profound that the subject eventually lost the ability to recognize their own face in a mirror, seeing only the administrative mask they were required to wear. The walls of the vault begin to emit a low, resonant groan, the sound of the earth shifting under the weight of the rain-soaked city above. You notice that the ink on your own fingers, picked up from the earlier volumes, has begun to form patterns that look suspiciously like the fingerprints in the appendix. The shadow ledger is not just a record of the past, it is a predatory archive, reaching out to claim the curiosity of those who dare to read it. A final notation at the bottom of the last page catches your eye, written in a script so faint it is almost a ghost of a thought. The vault is not a room, it is a lung. You realize then that the rhythmic dripping of the water, the hum of the pipes, and the flickering of your light are all parts of a singular, breathing organism fueled by the data of the disappeared. The silence is the sound of the city holding its breath. As you move to leave, the lantern's light catches a small, polished disc of metal embedded in the floor near the exit. It reflects your face, but the features are subtly wrong, slightly blurred, as if your identity is already beginning to soften and smudge at the edges. The shadow ledger has noted your presence, and your arrival has been entered into the accounting. You are no longer just an observer. You are a pending entry in a system that never closes its books. The heavy door creaks as you pull it shut, the sound echoing through the hollow chambers like a final, definitive period at the end of a long, dark sentence. You ascend the stairs toward the rain, but the weight of the 3 volumes remains in your mind, a leaden anchor in your thoughts. The city above looks the same, but you now see the cracks in the pavement as the mouths of the vault, waiting for the next person to fall through the silence. The air on the surface is thick with the scent of wet stone and something metallic, like a copper coin held against the tongue. You walk through the rain, but the streets no longer feel like a path to your home. They feel like the aisles of an open-air library, where every pedestrian is a spine waiting to be cracked. Your footsteps on the pavement sound different now, hollow, as if you were walking across the lid of a great, wooden crate. You realize that the voluntary vacancy you read about wasn't a choice made by the clerks. It was a physical law of this place. You stop beneath a flickering street lamp and reach for your wallet, needing the reassurance of your own name, your own history. But as you open the leather fold, you find that your identification card has changed. Your name is gone, replaced by a string of digits that match the frequency of echo you saw in the third volume. Beneath your portrait, which is now a featureless smudge of grey ink, are two words that chill you more than the mountain rain: pending assignment. This is the final piece of evidence, the truth that the hammered lead could not contain. The shadow ledger does not record the dead. It records the living who have been hollowed out to provide space for the city's architecture. You are not a guest in this city, and you never were. Your memories of a childhood in a different province, the scent of a loved one's perfume, the sound of a distant sea, these were the habits fed to you to keep your original self quiet while your legal assets were harvested. You are a premium asset in the final stage of transition. The person you thought you were never existed. They were simply the administrative mask you were required to wear until your turn came to be filed. The vibration in your fingertips has moved to your heart, a steady, mechanical thrum that mimics the grinding of the bureaucratic machinery beneath your feet. You look at the people passing by, and for the first time, you see the glassy stare of the Janus Protocol in every pair of eyes. The city is a masterpiece of erasure, a self-sustaining organism that breathes in individuals and exhales infrastructure. You turn toward the river, feeling the ink on your skin finally become your skin. The greatest trick of the archive was making you believe you were the one reading it, rather than the one being read. What dark anomaly should we explore next? Tell me in the comments. And if you seek more truths hidden in the dark, subscribe.